All right. It is 1 minute after 8. So I'm sure we're going to have a few more hop on, which is totally fine. But I don't want to hold everybody up any longer than we have to. And I always am on a little bit of a time clock because you can't see it, but I have 3 dogs right here behind the camera. I have a foster dog, my dog, and then I am dog sitting for another foster, or a former foster. So anybody who follows my social media probably knows life gets a little crazy around here as I've started fostering dogs. So fingers crossed. I also have my trusty little spray pet corrector that tends to. So if you hear this like loud, like spray noise, it's what keeps him calm. Always got to say that because if it does go crazy. And at night, I hate putting them in the crates right before I'd have to put them back in the crates to go to bed. So anyways, I'm glad to have everybody on here. For those that don't know me, my name is Brandi Jackson. I've been with the PKB Girls Tour for like 10 years now. I think it's crazy to think it's been that long. I've had Brandi Jackson Golf for 12 years now. Played professional golf for 8 or 9 years prior to that. I played collegiately at Furman University. Had a pretty decent, college career and tried to get it done out professionally, but just didn't quite get it done, which is kind of what led me into doing what I do now with the recruiting consulting. Strictly just work with the girls now, which I love. And there's just so much to it. Love what I get to do. It's not just about the recruiting process and all of that kind of busy work and all of that. There's so much more to it that we work on, which we're actually going to talk a little bit because it is kind of what this June 15th date kind of triggers for some of the girls. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and just what to do. So kind of got 5 main areas that we're going to talk about. And just help get you prepared for what the date means, what to expect, what you could be doing even between now and then. Obviously, we can't go back into the past and change what you should have been doing up to that point. But just to give you a few tips on some things to be doing, and just in case I forget at the end, if anybody does, need some help, need some assistance, you can reach out to me. All the info is through the RecruitPKB site. Brandi Jackson Golf. It's Brandi with an I, as you can see on my shirt here. Reach out. All PKB national members do have a free initial 30-minute consultation. So you can definitely take advantage of that. This weekend is actually my birthday, so I'm going to be out of office starting like tomorrow afternoon and through Sunday for a little weekend trip to the lake with my friends. We'll be back. Crazy week next week as this stuff gets started. But again, reach out if you do want to set something up. We can go over a few basic initial pieces process-wise and then talk about whether or not you might want some ongoing help as this process kicks off and can make things a lot more specific as we move forward to where your daughter is in the process. So, all right, let's get started. Like I said, we've got kind of 5 areas. I didn't do a slideshow. Sometimes I like doing PowerPoints and switching back and forth. Other times I just want to get on here and chat. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. But 5 minutes, we're talking about what does June 15th mean? Really kind of who does it affect? Because even within the 2025 recruiting class, it actually doesn't affect everybody as much as it might other people. What should you do prior to it? What to expect the day of? And then what to do after. So to start with, what is June 15th? So the main thing that June 15th means is it's the first day that coaches are allowed to initiate and or reciprocate calls, emails, text messages, video chats, all of that. So it's the first time, so they can initiate them and or they can take the calls, or if you call them or set up the video chat, it's the first day they can do that. So it's still just electronic communication. There's still no in-person. And keep in mind, to make things simple, this is D1 rules, contact rules. And also keep in mind, most of these contact rules are all things that coaches are supposed to know what to do and not to do. It's up to them to follow these rules and uphold these rules. It helps for you to know and understand them so that you don't get confused and you don't wonder why, or you don't maybe say things that make no sense during different times of the process. But these contact rules, it's all about the coaches and what they're restricted on and when they can do things. And if something happened, it's on them from a compliance punishment kind of perspective if they were to break these contact rules. But again, starting at midnight on June 15th, Some coaches will, sometimes they'll have them set up as like automated things that they've gotten certain players that they want to send to, especially if they're early to bed, like myself, and aren't going to be up at midnight. But they can kind of, you know, have those things ready to go out. Some, it is still some mass, you know, it's not very specific emails. They may have a group that they're trying to start with. Others, it is very specific. It is directly to you. Others want to quickly set up a phone call. Others just kind of are trying to get some feelers out. So we'll talk about that on the day of thing. But again, June 15th just means that for current 2025 recruits, D1 college coaches can at that point text, email, phone calls, video chats, DMs through social media. I think that covers them all. So that's kind of the big deal about June 15th. I'm going to go kind of out of order than what I initially said. So prior to that point, you as a recruit can have always been emailing them and keeping them up to date on what you've had going on. Coaches theoretically can talk to your swing coach or your high school coach, or even somebody like myself. If you're not a really, really top ranked, you know, at the top of their list recruit, more than likely they're not going to do that. And some coaches don't do that at all. They just want to kind of wait until it's time. They don't do that. But theoretically they could. But yes, up until June 15th, you should have your resume, video, email, have been updating the coaches on what you're doing, especially if you are in any way kind of a higher ranked recruit. So if you're top in the state, you know, top 100 in your class to, you know, 100 to 150, that's a very, very broad range. But especially if you're on that higher ranked class, and from a scoring average, if we want to put it into a scoring average perspective, you know, 76, 77 and under right now, playing 58, 5,900 yards, then yes, you are definitely in the more active piece of what needs to be going on. I get a lot of questions about that. Not that I don't want to dive into that, but that is sort of who it affects and how that kind of sparks into a couple of different kind of paths for everybody. But I do like to just reiterate that. And again, we'll talk about that when I talk about kind of who it affects. But as far as doing, you know, things prior to that, definitely a higher ranked, lower scoring average player needs to be and have been super active with their own communication, social media, emails, updates, all those kinds of things prior to June 15th. They needed to know your summer schedule. If you haven't got that to them yet, you need to get that to them. They want to know, where are you going to play? Can they come watch you if they're interested? They need to know those things. Your resume that needs to be complete, have everything it needs on there. Some video, if you've been able to do some good video work, sending that to them, a really good written email, all of that needs to be done prior to June 15th. One other kind of prior to June 15th that you need to do is really prep for the interviews that you're going to have. That's a big thing I'm doing with pretty much all of my 2025s next week. If we haven't already done it, they get a list of questions to expect from the coaches. So there's a handful of just typical questions. Doesn't mean all coaches are going to ask them. Doesn't mean coaches aren't going to ask you more than that, but we go over some potential questions that the coaches may ask you, questions that you need to ask the coach. Obviously, those are very fluid on what does the coach talk about. That may be a question you ask, they already answer, but making sure they're prepared with questions to ask, and then just learning how to have a conversation and not be so nervous and just so like, hey, let me read off these questions. And you know, that's a lot of times where a coach dictates who do they continue to recruit and who do they not. How comfortable was that first conversation? They understand you all girls are young. Some of the first times you're doing these things, they get that there's going to be some nerves, there's going to be some mistakes. But when you go in there and you're comfortable and you've got really good energy, that is a big thing. So doing some interview prep, doing some of the homework ahead of time, but especially that interview prep and really knowing things that you might get asked and things that you want to ask the coach is really important to do prior to that June 15th. If not, it'll be too late that day because it can get kind of crazy. So a couple of things prior to June 15th to keep in mind. So now we're going to talk kind of about who does it really affect? So that's one thing. So for everybody who doesn't know, this June 15th date went into place back in 2019. Otherwise, the recruiting process was much, much different. It doesn't do me any good to kind of explain it because you all as kind of more newbies won't really know the difference. The ones of us that have been in this process and have gone through different phases of recruiting and how much it's changed know that. But this went in place back in 2019, but it takes a year or two for the recruiting classes to actually kind of catch up to it. Then we had COVID for 2 years. And so really it wasn't until the 2022, even really kind of the 23 recruiting class that we kind of started to see how it plays out with this June 15th date in terms of what really happens. How does the process go from there? How quick does it happen? So we're still really kind of learning. And to be honest, even the coaches are having to kind of learn and adjust because the process kind of got condensed in some ways because of that versus the way it was before. So one thing you definitely see is we talk about this June 15th date and you definitely want to hype it up and get excited about it, be prepared for it, but it's definitely very, like I said, very top heavy, top, 50 to 100 golf programs in the country, and then top 50 to 100, 150 ranked players in the country as well, or really in the world, because they're the ones that are really trying to get out and get a head start because they're going to be on both ends, the highest sought after programs and players. So it is, for those players, is a little bit more of a sprint. It is a lot of communication that can happen on June 15th. It can be overwhelming. So we'll talk kind of the day of as far as that goes, but it really is very top heavy on both, the coaches side of things for those high ranked programs and then the player side of things for those higher ranked players. And I know I'm probably gonna get asked a question and partly don't know that I'm going to do a Q&A just because some of the questions have such hard ways of answering it because there is weird gray areas for all of that. So again, that's why I highly encourage you to set up a call with me and I can really kind of help you understand this is where you're at with your resume and what to expect, because some girls aren't going to get much on June 15th. You're not going to have a lot of calls. You may not have any, especially again, if high 70s, low 80s and up. I mean, the process just isn't there for you yet. Doesn't mean you don't need to be doing some things, but your focus still needs to be mostly on your game and getting better with just a touch of starting with the recruiting stuff and kind of understanding what that is. And some girls I've seen, some have kind of been able to say, hey, just keep working on your game. We'll get to the recruiting process when that time comes. Others, I can see the anxiety that if they don't feel like they're doing something, that's going to cause more stress. So we get a little bit done and then it's like, focus on your game. Go make sure you're doing A, B, C, and D to try to get better. Let's make sure you're, in line with what that needs to be, but you got to get a little bit better over these next 6 months to 9 months. And so for those players, the process is a lot more of a marathon. And if you're not careful and you build it up and think that you're just going to make this process happen for you so fast and so easy and all this is going to happen, you will really create some stress over a long-term period of time that just starts to wear you down. And it sometimes kind of just becomes not fun. So you've got to know how to pace yourself when you're in a certain parameter from a score standpoint with your resume and know kind of how to balance it and understand that this June 15th date is a kickoff, but it is going to be, it's almost like a football game. You kind of got the first quarter, which is going to be, like I said, you're really elite players, the first quarter to the first half, which is really kind of the first 3 months to 6 months of the rest of this calendar year. Then you kind of have the second half. That's really not necessarily quarters of next year because it's a little bit longer than that. Really, the winter time kind of just slows down, and then come spring and summer of next year, just like right now for the 2024s, it gets super busy. Yes, a lot of your top D1 programs do finish recruiting in that first 3 to 6 month window, but some of them find themselves needing players. So if you really work hard and improve, those opportunities will still be there a lot of times. But it just does become a little bit more of a marathon that you just got to work on getting better, getting your game where it needs to be. And eventually the process and the timelines start to kind of run parallel. And then eventually they merge for what the coaches are looking for as the process moves on. Your lower D1s, your D2s, your D3s start to kind of come in. Your game gets better. And if it really gets a lot better, sometimes those mid D1s, the top D1s even come back needing players this time next year for you all as 25s, and those opportunities are there. So it's something I keep trying to reiterate to everybody, but I see that it's hard. I keep preaching this to all of my 25s, just like I try to do to my 24s, but I also get, we got a lot of girls that really feel like, hey, if I'm doing the work, I should see the results. But you just got to know this process for majority of players is, 6 to 9 months up to a year, and even into over a year next year. So we made it about 17 minutes before any craziness. So, but good timing, because do want to switch gears just a little bit. So now let's talk some about the day of. So what to expect on June 15th. Again, like I said, emails from coaches trying to set up phone calls to talk to them, maybe video chats. A lot of girls are going to be playing golf that day. Coaches understand that. They know this date doesn't necessarily fall in the best time, but then again, it's better than you being in school. It's not the worst time, but obviously a lot of you may be on the golf course. So do know you do need to get back to these coaches in a timely manner. A lot of coaches will base how they feel your level of interest on how quick you get back to them. Not saying you got to get back to them within the first few minutes or even the first few hours, but if you wait days, then yeah, those coaches are going to be like, well, she's not very interested. So you do need to do things in a timely manner as far as getting back to them, and at least say, even if it's, hey coach, I'm in a tournament, I've got a late tee time today, early tee time tomorrow, definitely want to talk to you. I'm done at 3:00 tomorrow, at least letting them know what your schedule is and letting them know they will respect that you're in a tournament. And that is, as soon as you get done or as soon as you have free time, you're going to set that up. So definitely keep that in mind. Reply to everybody. I know some of you may get a ton of emails and you may look at some and be like, well, I'll never go here. I want to try to tell you to reply to all of them. And even if so there's kind of 3 segments there of that. There are definitely some places that you legitimately have enough of a resume, enough clout, I guess is a good word for it, that you can say no to some certain schools and politely say, I really appreciate your interest. But I just don't think blah, blah, blah would be a great fit. Thanks so much. If anything changes, I'll let you know. You can do that very politely. Now there's this middle segment, or for some of you players who are maybe really being unrealistic and may think, well, no, I want to go to these schools and not these, but actually these schools are ones you need to look at. Don't eliminate too early. Especially if you don't have a lot of interest, and you didn't get a lot of emails, do not eliminate ones just because you don't think you're going to like it or it's not as ideal as you think it is. Take the opportunity to maybe learn a little bit, maybe set up a call. It doesn't mean you got to do it with all of them, but until you get some viable options, then you don't want to eliminate things too early because it will come back to bite you. And so at least trying to give a little bit of attention to it. Don't waste a coach's time. Don't necessarily do that, but most coaches will respect it. And some of them they just want to get that chance to talk to you, because some really have enough confidence in themselves that, hey, we can talk her into it. We can just get her on campus. So some don't mind it. Others will get a little irritated if they really feel like, there was just no point in it anyway. So keep that in mind, where it's okay to say no to some that genuinely are just not what it's going to be. Be careful with that middle ground of ones that might actually be the fits that you need. You're just not quite ready to accept that yet, or just needing to have some kind of backup or just some initial conversations with some coaches, because sometimes you will learn what you can learn is what you don't want. Sometimes that helps you better for the programs you do like to realize, or maybe even just some little something that the school's not what you want, but something about what that coach does. It's like, hey, this isn't really the school and everything, but I really like how this coach does this. I want to try to find that somewhere else that you didn't even know was something you liked or didn't like. So keep that in mind with that is, don't eliminate, and do your best not to just completely ignore a coach reaching out to you, give them a simple reply of, thank you so much for your interest. I really appreciate the consideration, but your school, whatever it is, just, I don't think it's going to be a good fit, or several different ways of saying that. They will have such respect for you doing it, just like you as a player. I will tell you, moving forward, it is some of the most frustrating things when you get no replies from coaches. It's gotten a little crazy, I think, more and more with coaches doing that. I fault them, but I don't fault them. I've been dealing with this with a lot of girls that coaches, I'll tell you, I had some girls every year with coaches. There were several coaches who set a specific time for a call with a player, and that coach didn't even show up for the call, and then one of them set up another time and still didn't show up for the call. And then there have been coaches who, if the players go on a visit and the coach will say, here, you've got my cell phone number, like, I'm easier to get in touch with that. That player will text that coach numerous times and get nothing back. Coaches that say, yes, we're interested, you're the top of our list. Weeks will go by that you'll email that coach or try to reach out and you'll get nothing. It can get very, very frustrating. So just keep that in mind initially, how it feels, and just know that a lot of times those coaches feel the same way, and they would rather a simple no thank you than no response. Again, all of that has some little bit of specificity. That is so not a word. Anyways, my brain is already checking out on the birthday weekend, trying to stay with it through this. So also that day, make sure ahead of calls that you do the research. Don't ever get on a call and not know anything about the coach, the team, the program. Have some notes, write notes down as you're in that conversation. I mean, all of my calls I have with clients, especially the way I have my camera set up, you can't necessarily see that I'm taking notes. You don't want to just be sitting here like looking down writing, but you can jot a few things down, or hey, mom, dad, if you're there, while I'm all about you young ladies doing all of this, it needs to be you doing these calls. Kind of skip that part. You as the girls do this. You've got to be the ones doing the calls, sending these emails. In these first calls, it needs to be you. I say on these first calls, let it be the player only. There's a time and place for the parents to come in. It's okay if you as parents want to be on the background and listen, just so you can kind of hear, but you as the player kind of dictate too. Like you're going to feel a little more comfortable, feel like you're going to be yourself if it's just you and your parents aren't listening. That's definitely a big family kind of decision, but it's okay for you. There's a time and place when you as parents need to come in a little bit more, be a part of things, but highly encourage that first one to be just the player on the camera or the call, unless the coach says otherwise. But as long as that goes well, you're going to have that opportunity for that later on. But again, you as the player, it's okay to have a notepad that you've got some of those questions that you can kind of reference. You just don't want to keep looking down so much. And so, a lot of times my notes are so messy, I can't see them, but I'll sit here and take notes as I'm talking, and, you won't necessarily see it because I'll just kind of glance down. But if you want to jot some things down, like I said, have some research done, know about the coach's bio, know some inside things as far as that goes. The how the team did this spring, just some of the, part of the call is learning that. And there are going to be some coaches who reach out to you. You were not interested in that school. They're the ones that reached out to you. And in those cases, they're going to not expect you to maybe know as much because they did reach out to you and you haven't yet, but still know some things. But especially places that you were saying, hey, I really want to go to this school. You've been kind of pushing hard. You better know some of the reasons why and know some of the stuff about them and be able to carry on a conversation with them about the program and the school and things that are going on. So make sure you do that. Okay, to have a notebook, take some notes, because it will be, if you've got several calls that day, you will forget who said what. As soon as the call is over, you didn't get some things jotted down. As soon as it's over, write some thoughts down, write some notes down, keep a book of it, keep a record of it. Again, because the parents are going to be in the room with them, take some notes off to the side if you want to, just so that you can help with that. That's definitely okay. So that's day of. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Like I said, you as the players do it. And just one of the other things that I'm going to say is probably one of the more frustrating things that I see when I first talk to a player, which a lot of times when I do my initial consultations with players, or if it's an eval in person or whatever, is I take how they first come to me and how they get on a video chat with me or how they introduce themselves to me, as there's a good chance that's how they're going to be with a college coach as well. And sadly, some of y'all don't give off the best first impression. And so you've got to keep that in mind. Like, I know it's hard to do. I know you're nervous. I know not everybody has the most bubbly, like energetic personality. I really actually don't. I'm about one of the most even keel, just, I don't go high, I don't go low, like kind of person. But I have learned when you have these conversations with people, if you want to get them engaged and you want to make them feel important, you've got to be enthusiastic and you've got to be engaged and you've got to act like you want to be there. And so sometimes it does just come out from nerves. The nerves turns into kind of shyness, and that quickly does turn into, just not being interested. So do your best to fake it as much as you can, and just be engaging and enthusiastic and smile and sit up straight, be in a good setting, be where it's quiet. I know some people have some internet issues. And again, this is saying it's a video chat. It may just be a phone call, but still don't just be laying back on your bed trying to have a phone call, because you can even kind of feel that vibe through a phone call, even though you're not on video. But if at all possible, make sure you've got good coverage, good Wi-Fi. If you've got to go somewhere, do that. Just make sure it's quiet. I do some of these calls with a chance that my dogs might bark, but in those settings, I mean, if I was about to do an actual, potential job interview, I would definitely have the dogs completely somewhere else. I would not have any distractions. I probably wouldn't have this like camera sitting up back here. So same thing, think about those things, what's going on behind you, what's going on in the background. Make sure you allow for plenty of time. Don't book too many back-to-back calls so that you can't finish one. That's the one thing you don't want to have, is assume the call is only going to be 15 minutes and you have another call and that one goes 45 minutes. So make sure if you do get a lot, you space them out, and you assume that the potential that call could go for at least an hour. It's definitely possible. A lot of the initial ones are probably more 15 to 30-ish minutes, maybe 45. But I would say, to be safe, always try to keep it to an hour. Some of these coaches are going to have a ton of calls as well. So they're going to be a little bit shorter and sweeter with them too, but you can't know that necessarily ahead of time. So again, day of, all of those things. And then just talk a little bit about after. So you've had these calls, it's been the 15th, 16th, 17th, or maybe you had some calls on the 15th. Always follow up with, really nice email that says, thank you so much for talking with me. I really enjoyed learning more. If there's maybe a question you forgot to ask, it comes up, ask that during that email follow up. Keep them up to date on what you have doing or what you have going on this summer. You'll get a feel. You may have one of those calls where you kind of tell, you can kind of just tell that, just didn't go well. Wasn't feeling it. Again, don't just totally write it off, but that may not be one that you stay as active and you push as hard. But you've got to stay on top of things through the summer. Coaches are going to probably be coming out to watch you play. Trying to talk to them. Don't hide from bad rounds either. It's a chance to connect with the coaches, whether they get out to watch you play or not, especially during this initial time, is just because you have some bad rounds or you don't play great. Yeah, there's a chance you're going to lose some interest from some coaches for sure. If that happens, I mean, there's only so much, but you can also maintain some level of interest from them if they see how you're handling it. They don't want to hear a bunch of excuses necessarily, but they just want to hear about, how'd you feel about your round? Again, especially if they're coming out there to watch. If they see, hey, she really did kind of see what it was. But, if you're completely off and the other, in left field on why you didn't play well and what they see, sometimes they're like, does she really know her game? Is she really going to get better? Does she really get it? So that's what's really important about the summer, is continuing to stay in touch with them. Like I said, give a good email or text follow-up after the call to say, thanks so much. I really appreciate talking to you. Very genuine, very appreciative. It goes a long way for sure. I'm big on handwritten notes, but I don't suggest those really until you actually get to taking visits. Sending handwritten notes after visits, very important, a little bit down the road, but I always like to make sure I plug that in. That's not necessarily something you need to do after phone calls. That's maybe a little bit too much, but definitely if you take visits in the fall, handwritten mail notes that go in the mail go a long, long ways then. But right now, with the calls and things being just kind of virtual, send them an email, send them a text. You appreciate it. Stay in touch through the summer. continue to kind of ask questions, and some of it will just flow. You'll kind of go with what the coaches do. Some coaches are a little more responsive and talk a little more. Others don't. It kind of is just kind of feeling that out as the summer goes along. And that is where I work with the girls kind of to understand, like, you know, how to handle some of it. Because again, it's very confusing a lot of times. It's very hard to kind of tell. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and these coaches still surprise me and confuse me and baffle me for some of what they do and what they say. I mean, that's just human nature, I think. But just keep that in mind. Do all that you can to stay in touch if they come watch you play, especially. And then obviously the goal is working up until August 1st when visits are allowed, and potentially being able to take visits starting August 1st throughout the fall, possibly make your decision during that time. All of that then definitely becomes very individual. How'd your summer go? How realistic were you? Lots of factors as to whether that happens or not. So that's, I always like to say kind of it in a nutshell. Again, love doing these webinars and these group chats. It's always just really, really difficult. And I think the process has definitely changed in a way that, you know, I could sit here and say, everybody needs to do this and this is how it's going to be. But when you're at a different place with your game, it's just a different timeline. And I think a lot of people get overwhelmed by it because they think that because this person's moving along with it, they should be too. And yeah, if their game was there, they might be, but if it's not there, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get there and you're not going to have the opportunity. I try to keep a track. I did it with my 23s and I shared it with all of my 24s for the exact timeline to the month as far as when each girl, I didn't say which girl, but the timing of the commitments of all of my 2023s that I had, so that the 24s could see, okay, out of about 30 total, you know, I have anywhere 30 to maybe 35 total players within a recruiting class that, you know, kind of come in and out of the program as they commit. And like only 5 of them out of like 35 committed during that first 6-month window. So again, like I said, it's really kind of that top 10 or 15% that are going to commit during that initial kind of 6-month window. Then it was actually kind of not much that happened January, February, March. And then all the rest of them from like late April, maybe the start of May, committed from that point all the way up to like October, November. And that was the whole rest of them pretty much all, except for like 2 who decided to go more kind of academic route, ended up committing during that time. So again, it's just kind of understanding that and kind of knowing where you fit in. So I know this was a lot, as with all of the things that I do, and get to talking and try to make sure I hit as many points as possible. I know there was one question. Let me see. So somebody asked about the eligibility center and what is needed now. So it's really a good time. You could always start with the free profile. So it's never too early to do that. So that's just going ahead and signing up. You don't have to pay the fee yet, but it does go ahead and get you started. And that just basically allows you to get into the process a little bit. And if you realize that you're going to go to a D3 school, or you maybe not going to play, you don't have to pay the fee to actually register, but you can always go ahead and start your actual profile and get what you need in there initially. And so go ahead, you know, by all means, go ahead and do that. And then just as you start to see, you know, hey, I'm probably going to play D1 or D2 golf, then you go ahead and register and pay the fee and do all that. But otherwise, they do now allow just that profile to get started. So as you're registered, you're in there. I think that even goes and gives you the NCAA ID number. You just don't actually have to pay to truly register and get cleared until you know for sure that you're playing D1 or D2 golf. All right, another good question. Like I said, I'm happy to answer a few. If they start to get specific, please don't be mad at me if I don't answer them specific. Like I said, it's hard to do when they get really individual and they don't apply to everybody. Regarding the issue of etiquette, when talking to a coach, so should you say yes, sir? Yeah, bleh. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You rarely can go wrong with saying that. I do feel like, as with so much in this world, like you can always offend somebody. There are definitely people out there that don't like to be called sir or ma'am. But I do think in this setting, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, the coach is going to respect that. And they may say, hey, you don't have to call me sir. But if you can, it does go a long way, to have that etiquette. I think you can still be respectful and you can still carry a really good conversation if you don't. But again, you can very rarely go wrong with that. And being that you are like a lot of people, I feel like we joke with one of the guys at the gym, he got in trouble before because he said, thank you, ma'am, or something to one of their clients who was a little bit older client, not that much older. And I mean, she did not like it. So it was like a 38-year-old guy saying, thank you, ma'am, or yes, or something to maybe late 40s-year-old woman or something. And she did not like that. But I do think as a teenager to any level of adult, that should always be a level of respect. So I would say always lean towards doing that. Sometimes it's hard, names are hard to call. Some of the coaches have tough last names. But you can always kind of say, like for me, Coach Jackson or Miss Jackson or something. Or you can always just, right off bat say, hey, what is the best thing to call you? Some have hyphenated last names. But hopefully when they first get on, they might be able to, they would introduce themselves. So any more questions? If you want to type them in the chat box, I'll stick around for a few minutes. Not quite ready to, actually got a call tomorrow morning on an initial consultation. And then I said, then I'm checking out for a few days because next week will be super busy for me and all the girls. Gonna assume nobody has any more questions. If one pops up, I will. Oh, okay, one more. When talking to a coach, are there any topics you should avoid that are golf related? Oh, one thing is, initial consultations, or sorry, initial conversations, you don't want to get too much about scholarships. That, the initial conversation needs to be a little bit more about just getting to know each other, the school, the program. Let the coach lead any of those conversations initially. There will be a time and a place for that later. So, don't try not to get into that too much. But topics to avoid, sometimes with certain injuries and stuff, you might want to be a little careful about, looking at why you weren't playing during a certain time. I mean, obviously, if it was like a broken arm or something, occasionally, if you're struggling with some kind of chronic injury, yeah, you don't want to hide it from a coach, but until you maybe know what's going on, sometimes if you maybe, say I've had this wrist injury that's been going on, that might deter them from being like, okay, she's always going to have this injury. So until you know for sure, something like that might be something to just not throw out there initially. Again, if it's something, that happened, that's over and done with, or whatever that might be, that's one thing. But sometimes with that, some maybe talk too much about injuries and that's why they missed and why their game's not, not where it's at and they're behind. Sometimes I will say coaches get a little frustrated with hearing, I'm a late bloomer and I was hurt, and sometimes it does. You probably got to be a little bit careful with talking about some of that and using it as an excuse and or potentially looking like it's something that's going to be recurring and ongoing. Again, I know that might sound a little kind of harsh by saying it that way, but you do see that a good bit. And sometimes the coaches, it kind of gets in their head a little bit about, hey, is this something that we're always going to deal with? Is it always going to be something? But again, there are definitely instances where that's the case and you legitimately had an injury and you missed time and, by all means. So just something to maybe keep in mind as far as that goes. Again, when you see as much as I have and the coaches have, you definitely take some things with a little bit of a filter there. Any other topics that to avoid? I do have a list of like kind of not necessarily questions not to ask. I can't think of any others that, would just be general things. There's definitely one specific to certain people that, you might not need to talk about. But at the end of the day, this is the tough part about the process. Just like when you first start dating somebody, or even when you're first going into a job interview, everybody is bringing their A game to that first call. Take that back. You're trying to bring your A game, especially as far as the players go. They're trying to bring their A game. Obviously, that might not necessarily happen because they're nervous, they're scared. So you may feel like, just totally bomb that. But just as far as like trying to say what needs to be said, what should be said, what does a coach want to hear, that might not necessarily always reflect who you are. And to be honest, a lot of coaches do just as much of that, especially if they really want you there. They can even like really hype up what they're doing, what the program's doing, it definitely can. It's something that you can't totally avoid. Again, that goes both ways. A lot of coaches have definitely been misled by a player and what they said they were about, and they got to college and maybe they did just change over a year or two before they got there. And again, same things happen with coaches where they hyped up things and then, once you got there, you're like, this coach really wasn't what I felt like. So that is one thing that you do. So you want to try to be as transparent, but yet with a little bit of a filter for knowing you're trying to make a good impression and you are trying to put your best foot forward. And then ideally you're backing that up when you're there, not just saying all these things if you really don't mean them, if that's the case, and definitely don't say them, but trying to bring the best, best impression that truly represents who you are, and what that looks like. So, how do you follow up after initial discussion with prospective school or coach? I said, the first thing is a simple text or email thanking them for, the time they took for reaching out. Again, you may, as soon as you got the call, you may be like, crap, I really wish I would have asked her this or asked him that. It's okay if you go ahead and ask that. They may not quickly be able to reply back, but if you've got another question that you maybe want to ask, and sometimes it is just having to just leave things because you can't visit. It's not like you can quite take that next step. So most of June and July is just kind of building that communication, but you as the player really have to take a lot of that initiative to keep that communication going. Sometimes it fizzles out. It just doesn't go anywhere. Other times you really kind of get connected with a coach and you continue to talk. Again, that's just human nature for how those things go. But so you definitely want to have that initial kind of sooner than later thank you email or text. And sometimes it just depends. You have a tournament, are they coming out to watch you play soon? Just kind of saying, hey, coach, got my first tournament of the summer next week. Super excited about it. But giving them some details too. And that's the thing. I think everybody keeps some stuff so surface level. Hey, I shot this, coach, and my stats for this. Coaches want a little bit of color and a little bit of, not overly detailed telling them everything you did, but they need to learn about you and your game. So whether it's via email or whether you play a tournament and you say, hey, coach, you played really well this weekend. Would love a chance to talk to you about my rounds and just kind of fill you in on, what's going on, kind of spreading that out throughout the summer with some of the coaches. And again, especially if they come watch you play, initiating a potential phone call with them to talk about it. That also helps you start to realize, do you and the coach see eye to eye on, especially if they came and watched you play, on what they saw about your game and what you feel like you did right or wrong. So trying to continue those communications, those conversations is a big part of. And again, some of it just happens easy. The coach kind of leads it. You just follow along. Other times it's just as easy back and forth. It just kind of flows. But most of June and obviously July is just trying to build that and just trying to keep them up to date on your tournaments. And it's okay too, if you talk about other things, if you're going on vacation and you did something cool, like, again, I think everybody gets so caught up in just updating them on golf. If you get your grades in, they would need to know your grades, test scores. If you do something outside of golf, they love hearing about those things. And, especially if it's some kind of an achievement or something, don't hesitate to update them on those things. It doesn't just have to be, hey, coach, this is how I played. I play next week, I'll let you know. Throwing some other stuff out there really helps them kind of get to know you a little bit. Even adding pictures in there, again, especially if you really feel like that coach is interested and there is some level of mutual interest. And especially if you've got their cell number or something, you don't want to bombard them and be sending them selfies all the time or something. But, if you do go on a trip and you do something cool or something, don't hesitate to do it. And even, like I said, send them a picture every now and then of something that you're doing or some swing videos or stuff like that. They definitely love that, the visuals of it, the kind of colorful details of things that you're doing, both on and off the golf course. The coaches love that. Then you'll start to kind of tell, okay, they're not responding, didn't go anywhere. Maybe they're not interested. Give it up until the time to maybe take visits. And if you don't see that start to happen, then you do have to kind of say, okay, that one didn't work. Let's focus on these that I am talking to, or hey, let's go back to the drawing board and let's not start all over, but let's reach out to some more coaches. So hopefully that answers the questions that we have. And again, as I said, reach out, go to my site, brandijacksongolf.com, my Instagram, Brandi Jackson Golf, B Jackson Golf, Brandi Jackson Golf. I think it changed a few years ago. I'm easy to find if you just search my name and golf or go through the PKB site. Very easy to find, and shoot me a message. If you want to set up your initial, 30-minute consultation, if you really feel like you need some help with all of this, I do still have some room for some 2025s. We're just kind of scratching the surface with them. So I've got a small group right now, but that really does build up over the next few months as this process starts and people feel kind of overwhelmed with it. So definitely reach out. We can get started sort of as soon as possible Monday when I'm back to work. But I do have a little bit of time tomorrow. If anybody really just feels super anxious, let me know. We'll get something squared away and we can set up a time next week to talk. I'm happy to help, happy to do what I can. Everybody, thanks for joining. Hopefully this gave you some good insight. And just, you all girls who are out there, or parents relate this to the girls, this can be such a fun process if you do just see it as such a learning experience. You're going to learn so much from this. It's going to be tough. If you're a really good player and you get to go to that dream school, it's going to be tough. It is, there's no doubt, but that's kind of what makes it fun. When you see what happens in the end and you see it, how it plays out, you can't take it lightly. You can't half do stuff. You got to put your whole heart into it and play hard, but definitely try to enjoy it and relax, but yet just see the challenge of it. It really is a pretty cool process that you're going to look back and see, God, I learned so much during that time, as stressful as it was, that puts you actually ahead of people who don't go through the process, especially just for going into college life and stuff. So everybody have a good night and a good rest of your week, and let me know if you need anything. So take care. Olivia, who just popped on. Yes, the recording should go out through PKB, and then it'll also go out, as long as you're registered, I'll send it out to all of the people who were registered. So all those emails will get this tomorrow, probably. I'll get it added in. So as long as you are on the registration list, you'll get the recording once it gets uploaded. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, everybody, thank you. Y'all have a great night and a good rest of your week.